Welcome to Mid-Level Adventurers, a podcast where non-experts talk about the things they love. I'm Jarrod Jehoda, and with me for this first series is my co-host, Matt Morris.
Hello everyone, it's Matt Morris.
Dungeons & Dragons is a fantasy tabletop role-playing game that can be defined by 3 core rulebooks: the Player's Handbook, or PHB, the Dungeon Master's Guide, or DMG, and the Monster Manual, or the MM. However, Wizards of the Coast also publishes supplemental sourcebooks that can include new class options, backgrounds, spells, feats, and even monsters. The most recent sourcebook that has really shaken up the landscape was Tashas Cauldron of Everything. But who is Tasha? Why does she have a cauldron? And what is so game-changing about this sourcebook? Come along as we hop right into the cauldron to find out. So Matt, let's start right at the top. Who is Tasha? And why is it her cauldron? And what does she have to do with the book anyway? Who is this lady?
Very good questions, which I have to admit I had to do a bit of research on.
Mm-hmm.
Tasha is a witch. Maybe that's simplifying it too much. She's a sort of long-time frenemy is the word I've seen used, of the wizard Mordenkainen.
Yep.
She eventually grew into a powerful archmage who ruled an entire nation.
Yeah.
As the self-titled Witch Queen, and then went on to transform herself into a demigod called Igwilv. And I think she's quite famous for having trapped rats for a spell, pun intended, on the material plane world of Oerth. Yeah, so that answers a little bit about who she is. Feel free to add anything to that.
Yeah, in D&D lore, she dates all the way back to, I think, either AD&D or 2nd edition. I'm not too sure off the top of my head. But Tasha, a.k.a. Natasha, a.k.a. Igwilv, was indeed a human wizard who rose to power on the world of Oerth, which is the Greyhawk campaign setting.
Right.
And yeah, she totally is famous for consorting with demons, specifically Grazd, who is a demon lord, with whom she not only captured for a while, but also was a consort of.
Mm-hmm.
And actually had a very powerful, fearsome, half-demon son named Euse, who has his own lore that we're not going to get into right now.
Oh gosh, no.
But kind of the coolest thing about Tasha is that she was raised by Baba Yaga.
Yes, that's right.
The mightiest of hags, the first hag, the prime hag. And it has been hinted that she may possibly have been born on our Earth.
Oh, interesting.
Hasn't been confirmed, but it's a common theory. She is often associated with witchcraft, dark powers, and beyond rising to power through the teachings of her mother, Baba Yaga, she also authored the book The Demonomicon.
Ooh.
Which is like the go-to book for all evil wizards and warlocks or spellcasters who want to research demons. It's got true names of demons in it. It's a very powerful ritual source book in D&D lore. So, being that she is so often associated with witchcraft and dark powers, she makes the perfect narrator for this source book.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I also assume that's why she has a cauldron. I don't actually have the answer for that.
You know, Baba Yaga rides around in a cauldron, so it's an homage to her mama.
Ah, okay. Very nice. Yeah, as I understand it, this book is sort of her collection of bits and bobs of precious lore. One of the features in it is that it's got in-character commentary from Tasha in the margins.
Yep.
Pretty sure that's similar to how they wrote Xanathar's Guide to Everything.
Yep, they've done this a few times. Volo's Guide to Monsters, Volo has little notes all over the place.
Mm-hmm.
In Xanathar's Guide to Everything, it is the Xanathar, the beholder crime lord of Waterdeep.
Mm-hmm.
And in Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes, it is full of notes written by Mordenkainen himself. It's kind of a fun little gimmick that Wizards has come up with, having a narrator for each of these new provocative source books.
I like it.
I do too.
Yeah, it makes it fun, other than just being a book of rules. Because we already have that, called the Player's Handbook.
Exactly, yeah.
Speaking of, why is this book so exciting, right?
So this book is exciting because it covers new player character creation options, including offering optional rules on changing skills, changing subclasses. It brings the Artificer out of the Eberron-specific campaign setting.
Mm-hmm.
It provides new ideas on patrons for players and DMs, going beyond Warlock patrons, but possible sponsors for your entire D&D party. It provides optional class features and subclasses to every single of the 12 base classes. There are new feats, there are new spells, and there is an entire chapter that is devoted to DMs, including how to make and deal with sidekicks, magical landscapes, hazards, traps, and puzzles. So many of these ideas are exciting because they really open up the character creation options, and as a DM, having a reference for magical landscapes is a really great tool. This book was hotly anticipated for months, and I feel like it was for good reason. I do not think this book disappointed at all.
From everything I've seen, it's pretty cool. I've just watched various people on YouTube give their opinion on it too, and the general consensus is that there's a lot of cool stuff in here. There are some things people I think are saying are average or whatever, but...
Sure, they can't all be grand slams.
Right. But overall, highly recommended.
They create options for people who want to play away, and not everybody wants to play the same way.
Exactly. If you're an avid book collector, you might be a little disappointed to see that there are a lot of reprints. But on the flip side, it takes some things that were in specific settings and makes them setting neutral.
Mm-hmm.
If you missed out on buying a lot of the books, as I have, it sounds like now that you could probably be pretty well set if you had the Player's Handbook, Xanathar's Guide, and now Tashas Cauldron.
Yeah, I agree. Tasha's is really a book for those who want to really get in and fine-tune and customize their classes.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a little much for a first-time player off the bat. I think they will be inundated and overloaded with options and not sure how to approach it. However, I could be wrong. Some people might not have that issue. It would probably overwhelm me if I read the Player's Handbook and Tasha's. I'd be like, but these things conflict.
Right. That's fair. Another thing that may be exciting to longtime fans of D&D is that Tashas Cauldron includes and now makes official lots of playtested material from Unearthed Arcana.
Correct.
So that's cool. I haven't followed so much of that myself.
Well, that's the whole point of their Unearthed Arcana, is they come up with these ideas that they have to increase and expand gameplay based on community wants. They have people playtest it from Unearthed Arcana. They get feedback, and then they take all that feedback and weed through it and see where the community lands.
Yeah. I can't tell you everything that came from that and made it to the book, but it's in there, so...
Yeah, a lot of it, actually.
Oh, good.
I remember seeing a lot of these on Unearthed Arcana at various points over the last year or so.
I know that you are very interested in the new character creation tools in Tasha.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell us a little bit about that? You've obviously got some favorites.
Oh, yeah.
What do they mean in general? This changes things, right?
It really does. First off, let's talk about the customization options for character origins. As we've discussed in previous episodes on the show, each character racial option allows you to increase an ability score. One of them is increased by 2, and another is increased by 1. We have talked about Gabriel Hicks' alternate ability score increase based on narrative.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, that's the module that we used to design characters on Newly Forged. But Tasha's pretty much takes this idea and, in a similar way, codifies it into official D&D language. The text reads, "You may ignore your ability score increase trait and assign ability score increases tailored to your character." They state that the common ability score increases in the PHP are based on archetypes. For example, Elven Adventurers are graceful, so they get a +2 dex. But maybe your character deviates from that, and as such you can remove the +2 dex and give your elf a +2 con.
Mm-hmm.
The only rules are that if you get 2 increases, you can't apply them to the same ability score, and you can't increase an ability score beyond 20 by this method.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a big shift. Now, gnomes can be fighters, no longer locked into being illusionists. Elves can be barbarians with great swords instead of precise, calm archers. And if you want to play that half-orc wizard, go for it.
Mm-hmm.
You can boost up that orc's intelligence instead of his con if you want. Although, con's good for a wizard too.
Yeah, con can help everybody. I love this little description. I pulled it straight out of the book. It allows you to customize your ability scores, languages, and certain proficiencies to fit the origin you have in mind for your character.
Exactly. If your character is a halfling but raised by a tiefling family, maybe they never learned how to speak halfling at all. But instead, maybe they speak infernal.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's what they were taught at home. So you can do swaps like that, and some races and sub-races grant certain skills or proficiencies that are based on cultural identity. And this is the big shift with Tasha's. It goes from elf, dwarf, gnome, goblin, whatever being a race to instead being your cultural heritage.
Mm-hmm.
Which is a big idea. Perhaps your character wasn't raised in the culture that would give you that proficiency. For example, if your dwarf was raised in an elven society for whatever reason, perhaps they don't have dwarven combat training, but instead have elf combat training.
Mm-hmm.
There is a list in Tasha's, and it's pretty straightforward. But if your race or subrace would grant you a skill, you can swap it out for another skill. If you are granted an armor proficiency, then you can swap it with a simple or martial weapon or a tool. If you're granted a simple weapon proficiency, then you swap it with another simple weapon or tool. If you're granted a martial weapon, you can swap it with a martial weapon like a longsword, or a simple weapon like a dagger or a tool. And tools you can swap with either another tool or a simple weapon. So instead of battle axes, your dwarf could have proficiency with longswords or a lute.
Mm-hmm.
Your half-orc might not be menacing, but instead might be rather convincing, so swap that intimidation skill for persuasion.
Mm-hmm.
Other options discussed are how you could swap skills later on in the campaign. Maybe you've been playing your character and that intimidation hasn't been working for you, but you feel like having the acrobatics skill would be better. Tasha's opens up the possibility to change that. The book always recommends talking with your DM about it and getting their approval because ultimately they're running the game at your table. But it suggests that those changes would best occur when you get your ability score increase.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So like at level 4, when you get your first ability score increase, that could be when you could do a swap out.
Right.
And then it talks about changing subclasses, which before was impossible.
Yeah, not even an option.
Yeah. Again, it says to check with your DM, and it recommends that this would happen when you gain a new subclass feature. When you do the swap, your old subclass and features are lost, and you gain all the features of this new one. It then goes on to talk about how this can be accomplished in a narrative form.
Yeah.
Perhaps your DM chooses to have your character invest time or money or maybe go on a little quest to achieve this goal. Or it could be done narratively with like a sudden shift, a traumatic event, or a self-realization that is the catalyst for this sort of thing.
I like the implementation of this, and they help characters that may feel like they got locked into a path that maybe made sense in session 0, but now as a level 6 insert class here, things aren't working like they hoped. It opens up a lot of flexibility, which I think is a big thing in Tashas Cauldron.
I would agree.
Just going back to the origins and talking about that, it helps if you want to break down the archetypes that have existed in D&D for so long. Now you can be a little more creative. You have more options. I think it's important to note that everything in this book is optional. If you still want to play into certain archetypes of character creation, go for it. This is not saying you have to completely rethink everything, but it just gives you more options, which I think is really cool. It gives you a chance to be more creative and really like shape a different narrative, especially if you're someone who is looking for that next character and they want something fresh and something new.
Yeah, that's the thing. The Player's Handbook has now been pretty much said to be a book dedicated to the archetypes of these racial heritages. Your dwarven fighter, your half-elf bard, your half-orc barbarian.
Mm-hmm.
These are the archetypes that come from these cultures and these heritages. So in Tasha's, it really shifts the approach for character creation to allow for much higher levels of customization into your character. And you're totally right. It's all optional, really.
Right.
And the DM does have the right to nix it, but it is now codified as official options in D&D. The other cool thing is it adds to the expanded spell list for pretty much every casting class, which is always a cool thing.
Very cool thing. When you think about it, it's about time. D&D's been out for a long time.
Yeah, 5th edition I think is in year 5 or in year 6.
I think it's 6 now.
Yeah.
I think we've entered year 6. We haven't had a new edition. This is the next best thing.
A lot of people are saying that Tashas Cauldron heralds the dawn of 5.5.
I would say that's pretty accurate, yeah.
I think by giving these customization options and presenting them in the way they do really allows you to get into the nitty-gritty of the game and really make the character yours, even more so than you could in official Adventurers League type scenarios previously. And this leads us right into these new subclasses that we have for all 12 core classes. But first, let's take just a second to talk about the Artificer. We're not going to talk too much about the class itself. It is essentially a magical tinkerer. You create cool things. But the Artificer comes fresh, hot off the presses of Eberron, straight into any campaign setting in 5th edition with this book. And it does so with 4 subclasses of its own.
Yes, which is pretty cool.
The book also adds 26 new subclasses to the core 12 classes.
Which is crazy.
Every class gets at least 2 new subclasses. Some of them get 3. And so we're going to talk about our 3 tops. And there may be some overlap in here. We haven't really talked about this. So it could be that we only talk about a couple of them. So go ahead. What is your top 3 favorites?
It's tough to pick a favorite, but like obviously I'm playing a cleric right now, and so my mind immediately went to check out the cleric, and whoa, Twilight Domain cleric, just sounds really cool.
Oh yeah, it is.
I'm gonna read a little bit here. It says, clerics who serve these deities bring comfort to those who seek rest and protect them by venturing into the encroaching darkness to ensure that the dark is a comfort, not a terror.
Mm-hmm.
The big thing with clerics is they're often fighting undead. They're anti-undead. And those undead things often hide in the dark, scary places. So now you're just this badass cleric empowered by the night. Bringing calm to be like, we got this, guys. Don't worry. Let's go. Right off the bat. The thing that is so cool about this, at first level, you get dark vision. Dark vision, wait for it, for 300 feet.
Yeah.
Which is nuts. And it gets better. You get to grant that to your party members.
Yep.
That's just wild. Outside of that, you get Vigilant Blessing at first level, which means that a willing creature that you can touch, you get advantage on the next initiative roll.
Yeah.
Which is pretty huge, let's be honest.
Especially if you're a fighter who relies on plate metal and doesn't have a big dex.
Exactly.
So to have advantage on your initiative roll is a great, great thing.
It's so good to pull up those party members. And the buffs go on. I mean, like, you get the Channel Divinity Twilight Sanctuary. So you can use your Channel Divinity to refresh your allies with Soothing Twilight, which means as an action, you present your holy symbol, and a sphere of twilight emanates from you. Basically, it grants temporary hit points equal to 1d6 plus your cleric level.
Which is pretty cool.
It's pretty cool. I think temporary hit points I took for granted in the past. Now that I've seen Amber playing Grig with the Protector Cannon, that's pretty huge sometimes.
Yeah, just having a few extra hit points on top of your existing pool can really save you in a fight.
In addition to that, you can take away the Charmed or Frightened effect on a character, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, it is.
You get to draw on the mystical power of the night to rise into the air. That's right. As a bonus action, when you are in dim light or darkness, you can magically give yourself a flying speed equal to your walking speed for 1 minute. You get to fly.
And flight is always cool.
It's at night, but it's still pretty cool.
Or if you're underground.
Or if you're underground, you're right. Oh, that's a good point. Or in a dungeon.
Yep.
Maybe. You can infuse your weapon strikes with divine energy. That's pretty cool. It's radiant damage, right? Because you're a cleric.
Mm-hmm.
And if you make it to 17th level, you can use your Twilight Sanctuary to create a sphere that gives you and your allies half cover.
Which is great.
That's pretty cool. That's like everybody gets a automatic +2 AC bonus.
And to dex saves.
And to dex saves, you're right. So, anyway, that's pretty cool. It's a super cool flavored buff cleric class.
Yeah, it's pretty great.
Your turn.
I think one of my top 3 has to be Path of the Beast Barbarian.
Oh, yeah.
I love it. You get Form of the Beast, which lets you transform your body while you're in a rage to get either claws or fangs or even sprout a tail.
Yep.
Your bestial soul lets you adapt your form after a rest to gain a new speed and perk that lasts until your next rest. Then you get Infectious Fury, which lets you give a little curse on enemies that you damage while you're raging, and they take additional damage because of it.
That's just wild.
Yeah.
It's so good.
And not only that, Call the Hunt lets you bolster yourself and give your friends extra damage on their attacks. It gives you an extra d6 of damage that they can just add to all of their attacks.
You're Wolverine.
Pretty much.
But with, like, bard buffs. I don't know. It's really cool.
Yeah, it is so cool. So I love Path of the Beast Barbarian. I think it's great.
I think an honorable mention.
Mm-hmm.
The other choice for Barbarian is pretty cool, too.
Path of Wild Magic.
Path of Wild Magic. Because if you know anything about the Wild Magic, you get a little table, you roll dice, a random effect. For the Barbarian, they're all beneficial. It's random, but they're all beneficial.
I have a friend who's very much looking forward to his current character dying so he can play a Wild Magic Barbarian.
Yeah, I don't blame him.
What else you got on that list of yours, Matt?
Oh man, there's so many. I think I'll just list off a couple real quick. As someone who's played a fighter, the Psy Warrior Fighter is cool. You've got an ability to shield with some psionic powers, I guess, to aid in your attacks. I don't know. That's pretty cool. And I've also played a druid, so I wanted to slip one of those in there. Something I think would be cool. The Circle of Spore.
Mm-hmm.
Or Circle of the Spore. At first I thought kind of weird, but then the more I read it, I was like, now you get to use mushroom spores to like turn things into like zombies. Control.
Yeah.
It's pretty neat. It's
Very
pretty
cool. Yeah, it's great.
What you got?
Okay, I think my next one is actually my favorite.
Oh, okay.
The Phantom Rogue.
Ooh, that is cool.
The first thing you get is you get Whispers from the Dead, which lets you gain a new skill or proficiency from the dead every rest until you rest again, whether it's a short rest or a long rest.
Mm-hmm.
Because the dead have spoken to me. As you can tell by the name, it's a very spirit or spirit of the dead themed subclass.
Yeah.
You get Wails from the Grave, which lets you summon spirits that deal additional damage to a second creature when you sneak attack on a first creature.
I know.
At range! At range!
It's so crazy.
You can create Tokens of the Departed, which lets you capture souls as a reaction when something dies close by you. You can capture its soul, and if you have just one of those tokens on you, you get advantage on death saving throws, Constitution saving throws, and you can destroy a trinket to use your Wails from the Grave ability without expending one of your regular usages of the ability. It's amazing. It's so good.
It is really cool. It is really cool. Like, full disclosure, we haven't play tested any of these. We're just like merely giving
it's
our
just
opinion.
reading it is so cool. But you can also destroy it to ask one question of the spirit that is imprisoned inside of it.
Oh, that's cool.
But then you get Ghost Walk, which lets you become a spectral ghost for up to 10 minutes.
Wow.
So you can hover, float through things. You're intangible. Then you get Death's Friend, which lets you deal necrotic damage with your sneak attack in conjunction with your Wails ability. And if you rest without any soul trinkets, one appears for you after you complete a long rest. This subclass is just designed to recharge your cool abilities, provided you're around things that are dying. And if you're an adventurer, there's going to be things dying around you.
Exactly.
But the cool thing about it is it's not a humanoid that dies. It's when a creature you can see dies within 30 feet of you, you can create one of these tokens.
Yeah, it could be anything, right?
I love the theme. I love the flavor. I love the abilities. This is my next character.
It's pretty good. It made it on my list, too, so I'm glad you mentioned it.
Well, yeah, so that's me raving about my emo goth rogue that I love so much. What else you got?
I also think that I've never played a monk, so this was just another honorable mention. The Way of the Astral Self.
Oh, yeah.
You use astral projections to give yourself, like, multiple arms, or I think at some point, like a creature's form or something, in an astral form.
Yeah, and you can use the spectral arms to make unarmed strikes.
Correct, yes. And you can use your wisdom modifier, which is interesting, instead of strength when you attack with those astral arms.
Yeah, and they increase range by 5 feet.
Yes, that's cool too. We could go on, right? There are a lot of cool ones.
Another one that I love is one of the new Warlock patrons, the Noble Genie.
Oh, I have not read about this one very much.
The idea is you're a warlock, and your patron is a genie. That's who gives you your spellcasting powers. But like a high-end genie, not just the ones you might run into in battle.
Ah.
These are like the Noble Djinn.
Okay.
The first thing you get is you get a genie's vessel. So you get a lamp or a bottle or whatever, a lantern. You can go inside of it. It's like an extra-dimensional space that you can vanish into. Think Genie's bottle from I Dream of Jeannie.
Okay.
Like when she goes into gas form and goes into the bottle and like it's this round kind of loungy set inside. It's like that.
Oh, cool. That's kind of neat.
The cool thing about that is having that grants you extra elemental damage when you hit with an attack roll. With any attack roll. Not just weapon, not just spell, any attack roll.
Oh, that's kind of cool.
Yeah. This elemental damage is dependent on what kind of genie your patron is. Because there are 4 types of genies, there's 4 elements, so that's kind of where that comes from.
Yeah, that makes sense.
They also grant you an elemental gift, which grants you resistance to the type of damage based on your patron. And you also get a temporary fly speed, which is kind of cool.
That is cool.
And then, later on, your vessel levels up, and you get a sanctuary vessel, where now you can bring up to 5 people with you into your vessel. But here's the cool thing about that. Spending 10 minutes in the vessel equates to a short rest, which is usually like an hour.
Wow, that's really crazy.
And if they spend hit dice while in the bottle for those 10 minutes, they get extra HP based on your proficiency bonus.
Okay, that's pretty cool, actually.
And then you get Limited Wish, which is when you can occasionally ask your patron to cast a spell for you. So you don't use one of your precious spell slots. The limits are, it has to be 6th level or lower, and it has to have a casting time of 1 action. But you essentially act as the vessel for your patron to cast it without using any components or any of your spell slots.
That's pretty crazy. And it can be from any spell list, I'm guessing.
Yeah, from any spell list. But here's the best thing. The genie is the only patron that grants warlocks the ability to learn the Wish spell.
Ah.
It is a packed spell for the genie patron warlock.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, but it's the only way warlocks can get it. One fun little thing we like to do here on Mid-Level Adventurers is go to our tavern corner and talk about what we are imbibing tonight. So, Matt, what are you drinking tonight?
I had an opportunity to pick up some more beer from Charleston recently, and I'm sure by now people listening to this have noticed that I have an affinity for beer from Charleston. So this is from a brewery called Edmund's Oast. If I haven't already had something from them on this, it's a crime. I think they're fantastic. This particular one is called Sensuous Force.
Ooh.
Yeah. It's a New England style triple IPA.
Sounds horrible.
I know. I was about to say, I know that is an immediate turnoff for a lot of people. I love a triple IPA, specifically New England style IPAs, which tend to be what we call hazy. They're more fruity and thick. I don't know, for like a better term.
Yeah.
And it just ramps all that up. It also means it's a higher alcohol content, usually. This one's a 10%er.
Ooh.
Yeah. But I love it. I couldn't drink this all the time. I think that's important to note. This is like a special treat kind of beer. Especially for the price. Like, you buy a 4-pack of the pint cans, and when it's like $15, $16, you're like, ooh boy. But it's delicious. It's just so full of flavor. All of the good things about a hop, they kind of go beyond the bitterness. The like really fruity and floral flavors. You just get a lot of that. And I think it's excellent. It's an excellent beer.
Wonderful.
How about you? What are you having tonight?
Well, in a fun kind of opposite end of the spectrum,
Yeah?
I went for something that I could drink anytime, all day long. House Lager.
House Lager. I've actually had that.
Yes. It is by the 12% Beer Project out of North Haven, Connecticut. It's just a simple, straight, clean house lager. It is crisp. It is satisfying. It's a little effervescent. There's nothing I don't like about it. It's just good.
Yeah.
So well done, 12% Beer Project.
Is it in fact a 12% lager? Because that would be wild.
That would be wild. Sadly, no. It's a typical 5, but it is good.
It sounds like everything a lager should be.
It's classically lager.
Okay.
There's nothing fancy about it. They're not trying to make it fancy. They just took something simple and made it pretty dang perfect, in my opinion.
There is something to be said about the craft lager. Probably for a while in the craft beer industry was maybe overlooked, but I think people have embraced it.
Everybody's been going hard on IPAs for the past 10 years.
Yeah.
So finding a clean, simple lager like this, my heart soared when I found it. I'm very excited about it. And I could drink these at the beach all day long.
Yeah, I think that's great. If I was to drink a lager, that's the kind of lager I would look for.
This was a 4-pack of 12-ounce cans for $8. So
good deal.
For a beer that I like this much, that's a good price point.
Excellent price. Well, cheers. Sounds like we both are very happy with our choices.
Yeah, cheers. And that's what we're imbibing tonight. So that's a quick rundown on some of our favorite subclasses. Pretty much all the subclasses in this book are pretty great. It's very hard to narrow it down.
Yeah.
I cannot recommend some of these enough.
The more you read, the more I'm like, ooh, that one.
Yeah. But it's not just the subclasses that are interesting in this. There's also optional features. But what do we mean by this? What we mean by optional features is the book gives you additional options based on your character's class, not subclass. For example, one of my new favorites is the blind fighting style, which you can take as a fighter, as a paladin, as a ranger, whenever you get to pick a fighting style in your class or subclass.
I'm so glad you picked that one.
Yeah, what blind fighting lets you do is it gives you blind sight within 10 feet of you, which means it doesn't matter if you are blinded. It doesn't matter if there's a magical sphere of darkness cast around you. It doesn't matter if they're invisible. If they are within 10 feet of you, as long as it's not behind total cover, you can see them.
I think this is so cool. When I read that, I was like, immediately, yes, it's on my list.
Uh-huh.
That's cool.
It is phenomenal. I love it so much. How about you? You got any that you are particularly fond of?
So I'm going to start with something I saw on as a Cleric feature.
Yep.
And I think other people can take it, like the Paladin. Harness Divine Power.
Yeah.
That sounds cool. You can expend a use of your channel divinity to fuel your spells. As a bonus action, you touch your holy symbol, utter a prayer, and regain 1 expended spell slot, the level of which can be no higher than half your proficiency bonus rounded up. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, what it does is it allows you to recover spell slots just like a wizard does with their arcane recovery.
Right.
One of the big complaints about divine casters is that there's no option for them to recover spell slots.
Yeah.
And because they only get them, after a long rest, it was a big point of contention that if we have more than 3 fights in a day or 2 fights in a day, we're using our spell slots to heal. We're doing all this other stuff. So we need to be able to get more spell slots. How can we do this without breaking the game? Well, you have Channel Divinity. Why don't we just make a new feature? Because you're not always going to be fighting undead, so your turn undead feature is not very useful.
Exactly. I think the Turn Undead Channel Divinity is cool. It makes sense for a Cleric class. You get other Channel Divinities depending on your domain, but you're right. You don't use them all the time, okay? You just don't.
Turn Undead is very niche. It's very powerful. It's very useful in that scenario.
Right.
But if you're in a campaign where you're not fighting a lot of undead, or in a world where there aren't even any undead because necromancy is illegal, then your Turn Undead is going to be pretty lackluster. But having Harness Divine Power gives you another valuable option.
Absolutely. And I don't think it's game-breaking. That's top of my list, right there next to blind fighting. What's your next one?
Well, next up is actually a monk feature for me. It's similar. It's called Quickened Healing. So it's a 4th level monk feature. And when you spend 2 key points, you can roll your martial arts die to regain that many hit points plus your proficiency bonus.
That's wild.
How cool is that?
That is cool.
And it makes total sense because monks are all about having total control of their body.
Exactly. Having that on a monk in your party can be huge if you're a spellcaster who has healing spells when you're trying to choose who's important to get those healing spells. If your monk's like, nah, I'm fine.
Yeah, and monks are incredibly fast and mobile, so they're not always going to be near the healer or within that 60-foot range. So if they're 100 feet away, they can take care of themselves a bit, which is key for battle tactics.
Pun intended.
Ah, yeah, haha.
Or maybe not.
It wasn't, but I like where your head's at.
Jarrod, with everything we want to talk about in this book, I think we're going to have to split this into 2 episodes. What do you think?
You know what? I think you're right, Matt. It's a heavy book with a lot of stuff in it, so I think splitting it up might be the way to go.
It was a noble effort to try to fit this all in one episode, but it's a lot, you're right. And I don't want to short ourselves on any discussion, and I certainly don't want to short our listeners.
I think it's one of those times when we need to just do a quick little wrap-up right here and continue on with episode, 0.5 next week.
How appropriate.
So Tasha's Cauldron of Everything is pretty chock full of goodness, and we are only about halfway through what we want to talk about. We have barely scratched the surface, but the subclasses and features that we've mentioned so far sure do shake up the 5th edition landscape.
That they do.
So with that, we'd like to thank you all for dipping your toes into Tasha's Cauldron this week. Please return for our next episode as we finish up our discussion on Tasha's Cauldron of Everything. Remember to check out our friend and the composer of all the music used on Mid-Level Adventurers, John D. Ivey, on SoundCloud.com. Make sure to follow us on Facebook at Mid-Level Adventurers and on Twitter and Instagram at MidLVLAdventure.
And please check out our website on Wix at midleveladventurer.wixsite.com and feel free to email us at midleveladventurers@gmail.com. And watch Jarrod and I on Newly Forged Wednesdays at 7 p.m. Eastern at twitch.tv/newlyforged. You can catch up on previous episodes of Newly Forged on our YouTube channel, so make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. That's NUULIFORGED.
As always, I'm Jarrod Jehoda.
And I'm Matt Morris.
Until then, mind the traps and keep adventuring.